This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. I'm Sam Alaimo, joined with Rob Huberty and Sam Havelock, former Navy SEAL, founder of SOFX. Sam, welcome to the Nobel Podcast.
Guys, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. So with that, let's take off.
All right. We usually start from the very beginning. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Bergen County, New Jersey, which is the bedroom community in New York City. So it was about 45-minute bus ride out of New York. Nowadays, it's probably an hour and a half, but it's really just south of the border of upstate New York.
You go to school there too?
I did, up through about, let's say, ninth grade. I was all Catholic schools. And then when I became a sophomore in high school, I then switched over to a public high school, which was sort of a crazy experience in terms of my upbringing, then showing up to a big public school.
I don't know that part of Jersey. Is that rural or is that suburban or urban?
It's suburban. Yeah, it's very suburban. It's like a small town. New Jersey gets a bad rap for the Parkway and the exits. So it's tough. But a lot of New Jersey is pretty nice, and that was a nice small town. It wasn't big, but you had a lot of community, and it wasn't. This was before the big box era and everything else, but it's still a small town.
Like gathering data from podcast to podcast from military veterans. I love this question. Did you get in trouble a lot as a kid? Like, what did your life look like? Did you get caught? Did you commit any young sins? Any of that good stuff?
I was terrible. Probably from the moment I was born. I didn't get kicked out of Catholic school, but there was a lot of conversations, I think, between my dad and St. John the Baptist School. There was probably a lot of check writing from my dad to St. John the Baptist because I was within trouble and average the whole way. So this sort of probably predicted my frogman identity. But I wired up. Back in the old days, you could buy M80s at south of the border when you were traveling from Florida up to New York and New Jersey, which my dad did all the time.
I did the same shit.
They came in these big bags, right? And you could so if you actually rigged up the whole bag, you were talking about several sticks of dynamite. But I was a little bit more moderate in my approach to blowing up the convent yard with a string of M80s, like on the last day of school in like 7th or 8th grade. So I lit the thing off, this enormous bang, and like everybody's out there, all the parents, they're picking up the kids for the last day of school. And so I'd create this shit show. And I remember as clear as day, like when I graduated, like the nuns were handing out roses to each of the families as the graduates. And the Sister Mary Alice leaned over to my mom and said, "Etta, we're giving you a rose today, but we should give you a wreath." They were so happy to be done with me.
From that background as a kid, I think you're right. It probably presages the SEAL thing. So what was the earliest memory you had of wanting to join the military at all?
I would characterize my identity as wanting to be a soldier. Like I've never not known that. Like I was that weird kid that, was running around in camis all the time. Whenever anybody wanted to come over to play, and I had plenty of toys and whatever, but I'm always like, let's go play soldier. And they're like, nah. But I was just sort of that kid. So it's always been part of my, I think, persona, which was a fascination of sort of rescuing people or being a protector, I suppose. It was just part of the makeup.
Is that too much G.I. Joe?
I had plenty of G.I. Joes. I was deeply informed by Soldier of Fortune, for sure. I'd watched sort of all the different military movies. And then when I was a young teen, I watched Apocalypse Now, and that was just next level. And I was like, holy, wow, I want to be that guy in the boat traveling miles up a river that snaked through the war like a main circuit cable, right? That's what got me interested in special forces, special operations, so on and so forth. Like that movie, for sure.
It's ironic because like that is one of a number of, you can call it anti-war movies that make young men want to go to war. All right, so you decided to do the military, and I think you went to the Citadel, correct?
Well, I'd like to say all the biggest decisions in my life were informed by an author that graduated from the Citadel called Pat Conroy. So what happened was I read Pat Conroy's book, The Lords of Discipline, in high school.
It's the same thing. The worst book about hazing made you want to go.
You're a 3 to 5%er, right? So the things that turn everybody else away from activity X, Y, or Z, draws me in like a moth to a flame. But I read the book. I'm like, wow, the 10, this is really interesting. There's a lion in a park and you can hear him roar from your dorm room. And I love the military stuff. I'll probably love this place. So it was the only place I applied. I got in, and that was it. I showed up, and I never looked back. It was from 17 on. I actually even went a little bit early.
What year was that?
I showed up there to do summer school so I could get a couple classes ahead of time in May of 1987.
You had a really unique experience. I want to dive into this one. Is you were first a Marine before you were a SEAL.
Yes.
When I was a kid, I was heavily weighing like Marine on the one hand, SEAL on the other, and I was kind of torn apart about it. You did both. So what was the impetus for the Marine Corps?
If I dig deep and answer that question truthfully, it was an identity crisis. I didn't want to go home, right? And what happened was after Knob Year, I'm like, I have found my tribe. Like, I love this stuff. This is the stuff I want to do. So I basically, after Knob Year, the next week, I basically go to the Marine Corps recruiter and I'm like, can I get to boot camp like next week, this summer, like right away? Because I just don't want this to end. And he's like, absolutely. We can have you through MEPS and into the Marine Corps Reserve within a week. Sign me up. So I just called my mom. I'm like, hey, Mom, I'm not coming home for the summer. I joined the Marine Corps. At that stage of my existence, it was not like, hey, the SEAL teams were going to be an option for me. I just didn't. It was like, hey, that's a North Star objective. Like, I don't know if I'd make it. I knew about them, but I think it was trying to make the safer bet. So I went, got through Parris Island, was able to get back for the start of sophomore year at the Citadel, was a reservist. And because I was already a Marine, then I accepted a Marine contract to go into flight school. Then I read a different book called Men with Green Faces, which you guys, I'm sure, have heard about. All the big decisions in my life are preceded by a book of some sort. Men with Green Faces, it was Daryl something or other. Guys in combat wearing Levi's jeans and having long beards and long hair. Holy shit, sign me up. Like, how do I get into that? And fortunately, my inability to fly, having gotten kicked out of flight school as a Marine officer, they made me an administrator in Washington, D.C., which as a young lieutenant, like, that's a really tough place to be. But what was good about it is I could bug the Bureau of Naval Personnel every day to let me first. I was just trying to enlist in the Navy as soon as my Marine Corps commission service was done. But they eventually said, no, we're not comfortable with a Marine captain being a seaman in the Navy. So we're just going to give you an officer slot to buds. So I was a captain in the Marine Corps. And within an hour on the day that I switched from the Marine Corps to the Navy, went out, got changed in the bathroom, came in, got commissioned as a Navy lieutenant, and shipped off to buds. I was 28.
Let's back up there because I'm really confused. I thought that Citadel was an officer commissioning program, whereas you enlisted.
The Citadel, unlike the service academies, is where you pay to get hazed.
All right.
Yeah, you don't. It's completely like. It looks like a service academy. It's more of a Great Gatsby-esque affair. The land of not exactly a service academy, like they can get away with more things. It's very joint because you have all kinds of different services in there. I was joint before I ever actually went into the military because you met all the different people from the Air Force, Army, Navy. You had a sort of deep respect for all the services. You weren't just programmed into the Navy way or the Army way or the Marine Corps way.
What does that mean? The Great Gatsby, is in New York and it's elites going to parties. What's different there? Like, I don't know what that means.
What I meant is the showmanship of it all. Like the showmanship of being sort of being a service academy, but it's the land of not quite right in terms of it looks and feels and acts a certain way, but it doesn't necessarily have the same.
Land of not quite right. I'll take that. That makes sense to me because everybody in The Great Gatsby's phony, pretending to be something they're not, and it's rich and enjoying life, and no one enjoys life there. So that's
that as well. Like nobody enjoys it. They have a saying about the Citadel. It's a great place to be from. It's a terrible place to be. I had fun there. It is a lot of fun if you go into the right mindset, but it's just quirky, I think is the better term.
You let the bit drop about getting kicked out of flight school, so I'm very curious.
Yeah. It was terrible. I never made it through my FAM 14 check because I was just terrible in the airplane. I got airsick all the time, was scared out of my mind. Like, I hate heights. I still hate heights. And I hated military free fall operations and parachute operations. I doubly hated that stuff. So, but you overcome your fears, right? If you want something bad enough, you're going to walk right up to the ramp.
I wonder then if that failing out of flight school put you into the track where did it set the seeds for SOFX? Did your work in the Marine Corps kind of set you off as a writer and a communicator?
I wouldn't say that, although it was interesting. There was a period of time where I was actually assigned to be a writer for the Commandant of the Marine Corps, where I was actually writing his letter responses to people. So, and I've been a good writer in the past, but I wouldn't say like I'm not a journalist. I wasn't born to be a journalist, and I wasn't born to be a writer. Your life is sort of a mosaic that gets formed by different inputs, and it's impossible level of complexity to try to piece it all back together. So I'm sure the Marine Corps had an effect on it. But
when did you get to BUDS? What year was that?
I think it was 96 or 97.
We've had quite a few team guys in the podcast. Everybody has radically different experiences in BUDS. I think you were OIC. So how was your experience in BUDS?
I think I got off easy. Let me start by saying in high school and so on and so forth, I was not a great athlete. Like, trust me. And so I never had any kind of big athletic attributes other than just being relentless. Physically, you can't stop me, but in terms of being fast and agile and like a great sports, no. What I lacked in athleticism going into BUDS, I made up for in guile and cunning because I was older and I could kind of see how the system worked. And it occurred to me, these instructors, if we keep them happy, our class is going to be treated well. And if we don't keep them happy, we're going to get beat. Having seen this pattern before, having been a cadre member at the Citadel, having been through Knob Year at the Citadel, at that stage of the game, having been through Paris Island Recruit Training Depot, having been through 2 stages, PLC 1 and 2 in the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, having been through TBS and Knob Year, this is about the 6th time I've seen this movie. So there was no surprises as to what the games would have been a little bit surprising, but the general theme wasn't. And so the theme was keep the instructors happy, we're going to get beat less. As a former Marine coming into it, it's not hard to make them happy because all you have to do with the class is just impose some military discipline. And you're going to be 15 times further than most forming BUDS classes because most OICs are having, let's call it a rank crisis. And they think that they're in the SEAL teams because they showed up to BUDS and they're not. And they think they've got to be everybody's buddy, and they can't be if they're doing their job well. So the discussion or the pact I made with the class was very consultative leadership style. It wasn't the same leadership style that you could get away with in the Marine Corps, but it was much more where I would explain the benefits of, hey, if we get here a half hour early and we prep our equipment and we clean up the place and do a better job so everybody's ready to go, from the first class on throughout the rest of the day, that means the instructors are going to get done early. That's going to keep them happy. That's going to keep us from getting beat. And I would explain that same message over and over and over. And I think that it allowed us to be very successful as a class because the instructors bin classes like within the first week or two. Hey, that's a shit class. Hey, those guys are fucked up or they're not fucked up. It's very binary. So if you're a fucked up class, you're going to remain fucked up and get beat the whole way. And if you're viewed as, hey, these guys have got their stuff together, you're generally going to be treated pretty well. We did well. They loved our class. I have very strong NCOs that understood, hey, the more senior guys that were in the class, if we get the class through these evolutions on time with the right stuff, we're going to have a better time. And so it went pretty smooth for us, thanks to all this other nonsense that I had been through in the past 10 years or so.
I'm curious from your perspective, because you were, from what I've seen in Buzz, most of the guys were Academy guys, Naval Academy.
Many officers were, yes.
Yeah. You were enlisted Marine, you were officer Marine, and then officer Navy. Did your experience of both the enlisted soul and the officer soul have something to do with it? Were you able to kind of think 360, 720 and get inside the heads of everybody in the class?
Yes, because I knew how to frame things from the perspective of having actually done the work. So I had a non-entitled platform to talk from, right? It isn't like I wasn't a corporal in the Marine Corps. And the other thing was, I would pick up a broom and do the shit right alongside everybody, which I think in BUD/S is pretty normal. Most OICs and officers are going to do that. So there's nothing spectacular about that. But there was also other, let's call them Marine Corps leadership reflections that I insisted on bringing into my leadership practice, like eating last. Like they would see me eat last and I would never allow myself to eat before everybody else. That's a very simple example of a thing that is a cultural norm in the Marine Corps that, while it may not seem like much, is like everything. So I think that there was minor things that I did that came from the perspective of having been an officer of Marines, coming from the culture of the Marine Corps, that was very stabilizing. I knew I was able to sort of walk the line as an officer with the enlisted guys. I could still effectively lead with the right level of friendliness, but the right level of decorum as well.
That was one of the most unique things about the SEAL teams, was you could refer to your officer by the first name.
Yeah.
Guys were generally sophisticated enough and nuanced enough to know where that line is and never to cross it. That's a really unique skill. I wondered, if I never really thought about it before, did you find a way to cultivate that among the team so that you could have that friendly relationship while still also being authoritative? How did you accomplish that? Because that also applies in the civilian sector.
I think that I was high functioning enough to understand that most of the people that are in the SEAL teams were there. They're all extremely high functioning as well. And you there's less that you have to say and direct. My general theory of special operations is that, by and large, the vast majority of humans that seek to participate in the special operations forces writ large, whether that's the SEAL teams, Green Berets, Air Force, whatever it is, have a much higher entrepreneurial quotient in their makeup. They're risk-seeking by nature. They've got a high requirement for dopamine physiologically. They do not want to be told how to get the job done. They want to be told what the job is. And they want the creative degrees of freedom to be able to use their intellect and come to the table not only getting the job done, but getting it done better, faster, and more remarkably than you thought they could. Like, that's what charges them up.
All right. So from there, you get to the SEAL teams. Where'd you start off? Where'd you head to?
Sure. Yeah. It was SEAL Team 8. I was blessed because I got through BUD/S in one shot, even though I was old. And for officers, it's a big deal. You have to hit these different wickets. If you don't hit these certain jobs, you're not going to get through your milestones. So I showed up right to SEAL Team 8. At that time, I went through what's called SEAL Tactical Training, and then right into my first platoon, where I was the AOIC, Assistant Officer in Charge, for those who don't know the acronym. I just picked right up where I should have as a young lieutenant in the Navy, and then did my first 2 platoons at SEAL Team 8 in the late 90s, 99, 2000, 2001.
So where were you when 9/11 happened, and how did that impact your career at that moment?
So I was in Stuttgart, Germany. At that stage of the game, I was the operations officer for a unit in Stuttgart, Germany, that managed the SEAL platoons that would come into Europe. And on 9/11, we were sitting in Stuttgart Army Airfield, which is the other side of Stuttgart Airport. And we were fixing to go to a big exercise. And then all of a sudden we see 9/11 happen on the TV, and we're like, wait, what? What's going on? And then next thing you know, over the radios and everything else, the entire thing is canceled. Everybody head back to your base and await further instructions. Most people's experience across the SEAL teams in the mid to late 90s was fairly more training oriented, less sort of dynamic operations and things like that, unless you were doing work at certain organizations or assigned to government organizations. But to answer your question, I had been, because we were blessed to be in Europe at that time, there were basically two conflicts that we were involved with as East Coast SEALs and also as Unit 2 specifically in Stuttgart. And that had to do with the Bosnian conflict and then later than that, the Kosovo conflict. And where I'm going with it is most of the tactics, techniques, and procedures with regards to modern surveillance and reconnaissance and intelligence operations were informed by tactical sensibility shaped in Vietnam, right? And so I presided over the sunset in the 90s of what I would call sort of the dying gasps of old school SR, where you would put people on a ridge line with glass, trying to send pictures through a PSC-5 up to a satellite, and you might have marked up the one picture. You would mark up that thing in the field, like with digital tools, and send it off of swamps, up into PSC-5, into a satellite. It showed up somewhere else, and hey, this is the bomb maker's factory right here, like one picture. After 9/11, the floodgates opened up with regards to the economics, with regards to title authorities and the use of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities at tactical level, full motion video 24/7. That fundamentally changed. And obviously after Red Wing, which we can talk about, like those days are over. But to answer your question, I and a handful of people who had been involved in modern urban target reconnaissance, advanced force operations, close target reconnaissance, and old school ISR in the mountains of Kosovo and Bosnia all got sucked up to start to develop the tactics, techniques, and procedures for what is now, let's call it, enlightened ISR.
Do you think that the U.S. military was ready for that? Were the SEAL teams? You have a lot of people devoting their full lives to being the best they possibly can. You say what that entrepreneurial special operations person, and we're training all the time, but we don't know what we're training for, and we're doing these things the best we can. Do you think that you were ready for that one mission there? And that kind of leads us today that we fought for 20 years in one environment. Are we ready for the next? And I think that's an interesting thing.
I think that we were fully ready as a special operations community, both within the SEAL teams and within the broader context of United States Army Special Operations Forces, the special mission units, our work with certain government organizations that had to happen very quickly right after 9/11. The facts speak for themselves. We routed the Taliban within 3 months in the world's most inhospitable geography, period. Hard stop. Finished. The U.S. Army Special Operations community, with a small handful of people, dropped into a desolate, dark space of humanity, partnered with the Northern Alliance, and in a set-piece unconventional warfare construct, routed a major force. Mission accomplished, right? Then we crowd in with KBR and 1 million conventional forces and all this other crap. And we basically set the conditions for never-ending engagement in Afghanistan, and we were pulled out of there. But if you look at, I try to be objective as I can, if you look at the operational construct, U.S. Special Operations Forces were completely successful in their first few months and continued to be throughout the war. Eventually, we found our man, right? Eventually, we went over the Hindu Kush in aerial refueling blacked out helicopters that nobody can spot on radar to drop into precisely a small compound to take out the world's most sought after human, and came out unscathed. U.S. Special Operations Command was created out of the embers of a 1987 failed hostage rescue attempt, Desert One. 30-something years later, my God, look what we did. I think that we were, as SEAL teams and Spec Ops, were completely prepared for the war that we got. When we were in Kosovo, I was running the Joint Reconnaissance, basically cross-functional teams of Rangers, SEALs, Green Berets, all working together to do target reconnaissance, really observer type stuff. 9/11 really changed the game in terms of becoming a joint force. But I think going into it, the forces, we were well prepared for that war, for sure.
Did you feel, the first few missions that you went on, was there a transition from, oh, this is what it's really like? Or was there an aha moment of how you had to change? We learned throughout the whole thing, all TTBs change. But do you think the base thing, that first mission, you were like, ooh, or was it you were kind of prepared for that, I guess?
It would be unfair to compare operations in the Balkans to operations in the Middle East and North Africa. It's you get the sense in Afghanistan that people really don't give a shit about life, like legitimately. Whereas in the Balkans, we're still dealing with Eastern European. It's just a different thing, right? And I think that, and you guys know this, every deployment, every engagement, everything, it's hard to compare to other things. Some of the stuff stays the same. Oh, this is warfare again. You never underestimate the ability of humans to be cruel to one another. I'll give you an example. So we're patrolling through this one village up in, I think it was in the Korangal Valley or some shit like that. So I go underneath this like bridge. I'm like, it looks like a real medieval old bridge with like rocks and stuff like that. And then there's like a cave complex right underneath the thing. We were clearing the thing, and I kind of looked in with the flashlight, and there was like a stack of skeletons and bodies and shit there, like not buried at all. It was the craziest thing. I'm like, whoa, what is that? So that's an example, right?
I want to fast forward to Red Wings. Would you be able to kind of give a high level of what that operation was and your role just prior to it?
That particular operation was to try to detain or otherwise mitigate a person called Ahmed Shah. And Ahmed Shah was a local sort of thug up in the Korangal Valley, which is one of the most dangerous parts of Afghanistan. It's probably one of the most dangerous parts of the world. Many have likened it to the Shaw Valley of Vietnam. Korangal is that to Afghanistan. So Ahmed Shah had been a bomb maker. He'd been responsible for killing a handful of Marines on the road that goes from J-Bad down to Bagram and so on and so forth. And so the mission to go get him was difficult because he would sort of hide away in his mountain redoubt up in the Hindu Kush, which is really tough to get to. From a helicopter standpoint, you have all kinds of problems with air density, the cold, the fuel you need to get there, so on and so forth. And the Russians got tortured up there. But in any case, so we had developed the mission to try to go target Ahmed Shah months prior in the winter. And then when SEAL Team 10 came in, the new squadron, I was the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Task Unit Afghanistan with the guys, which was primarily SEAL Team 8, but we also had SDV guys and some other different folks from around the community that were part of this task unit. And my relief, Eric Christensen, Naval Academy guy, a good friend and wonderful human as well, had come in with the task unit, and that was Squadron 10. One of my best friends in the world, Master Chief Peter Musselman. I'd known him before the SEAL teams. We were both Marines before we went in the Navy. In any case, him and a bunch of others, we'd handed off the target package and said, hey, we couldn't get to this one, but it's pretty hairy. It's got a lot of challenges, but we've prepped it. We've briefed the Siege of Soda for Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force, the people that were in charge of us there. And if the opportunity comes up, good luck. At that stage of the game in Afghanistan, it was a little bit quietish. There was different periods of time where Afghanistan was really hopping and it wasn't. But I remember telling Eric, I'm like, don't let this place fool you. And like, these people they have no respect for human life. Don't let the comfort of the green beans coffee place and the KBR lobster and steak dinners every Friday night throw you off. Like, those fuckers want to take your life, and you can feel it when you show up. Don't underestimate. I remember telling Eric, and I don't think he did, and I'm not saying that as a prelude to that. When you went up on these operations, even if you didn't have contact, you could sense that there was a feeling of a sort of death. That, Rob, is the difference. Like in Kosovo and Bosnia, you didn't necessarily feel like, you felt like now we're just sort of in implementation of a lasting peace. People genuinely are probably trying to get to a future worth having. In Afghanistan, there ain't no future. Like, their future is living the next day, maybe.
One moment that I had in my experience is the Taliban took a kid hostage, and his father, we were very excited to go want to rescue him. And we said, hey, we'll go do a hostage rescue. This is like what we do. We'll go do it. No problem. And he said, oh no, I'll just have another kid. And it was a passing thing. And it was just a realization that like this, to me, this was going to be unwinnable. Nobody can fight this. Anybody who doesn't, isn't willing to go die for their own son or won't even let us go die for their son, we don't have the same worldview.
Which makes it really hard to try to create any kind of system of incentives to compel people to do this, that, or the other thing. They just don't care. They don't expect to live past 30, 35. They really don't.
What is your takeaway of Red Wings, of what happened, of the tragic loss of, dear friends that, you knew beforehand? What do you believe that you take away from that loss?
That every single person involved were making the best decisions they could with the information they had at the time, would be observation number one. Observation number two is forgive yourself. If you're one of the ones out there like me who's wondered, what could I have done differently? What could I have told Eric about that? Why didn't I just shit can that target package if I felt it was weird or difficult or problematic? And we all think these things and we self-blame, but at the end of the day, at the inflection point of where people were making decisions, every single human in the system was making a decision not for personal anything, but for the advancement of the team, right? Okay, why did Eric get on the helicopter to go try to rescue the guys with the QRF? You show me the SEAL who sat in the TOC while half of his team is blown up on some shithole mountainside, and explain to me how he's supposed to live with himself after that. My point is, we as military people in the profession of arms, we have all been in that situation where there are no good choices, right? You're just trying to make a decision that's less shitty than the other. Christ's sakes, go easy on people. They were all doing the best they could do. They died doing what they were born to do, and they wouldn't have had it any other way.
It's interesting. The community, when I was in, there was they study this and, they try to use the lessons learned. And I think the trying to go back to it or place blame is easy. To really learn lessons, I think the community actually does a pretty good job of it. But that's an interesting thing that we do, these after actions, and we all have to live with it. And maybe I'm alive for some of those instances. Why did I go, the simplest decision this way instead of that way? And it's tough. And that forgive yourself really resonates with me, because I've had to learn to do that a lot in my life, of like retreading something else, or like what could have done differently that day, and a lot of things, and how a conversation could have gone, how this relationship, could have been better, the last time that you see somebody, what you should have said, and any of those things. You replay in our heads all the time, and to learn to forgive yourself is one of the hardest things.
But there's one thing I would say that is oftentimes, at least in the SEAL teams, I'm not sure about the Green Berets and the other things, but a lot of times, once you start digging into people's background, which they never actually talk about, for the most part, SEALs don't, but typically their childhood was marked by some sort of upbringing that was maybe less than ideal. And I think that somewhat, when people say, well, how do people make it through BUDS and do things like that? I think it's oftentimes has to do with that person having something to prove to either himself or something to run away from their past, right? That's what creates that drive and that grit. It's because you're running from something. Sometimes it's just demons in your own head, or you're trying to prove something to others. But that creates a bit of a deficit in your judgment from time to time, because you have a belief that you can get away with anything.
I think in our life, we have to decide if we're running from something or running towards something. That is a very difficult thing to know. And I think everybody is doing both at the same time. And as an outside observer, you can only see them running, and you don't know they're both running away from something and running towards something. It always sounds better to say that you are running towards something, that you have a goal that you're trying to achieve. But sometimes the best people that you ever met were, you just saw them running, but they were really running away.
It's interesting in the back end too. From what I've seen, a lot of guys, when they get out and they're trying to work through what they went through, they're working less through what happened in the teams than what happened before the teams.
That's exactly right.
I think your intuition's spot on. That's what the movement towards psychedelics, that seems to be having revelations in childhood, not necessarily rooted from combat.
I think that what gives people the fire to get through BUDS or one of the other qualification assessment selection programs is you had to show up to the game with something really wrong or something to prove. I don't think that it's not like, that's a good idea, let me join the SEAL teams. Because it's really the functional equivalent of like sort of joining the Foreign Legion. Yes, we're part of the Navy, but we're not, are we really? Don't take that the wrong way, but you guys get the point. It's like saying, hey, I'm joining the SEAL teams is akin to saying, hey, I'm trying out for the French Foreign Legion. Like, you may not hear from me for a while. We'll see how it goes, either, with my shield or on it. We'll see.
I want to wrap up the military because I want to get into what you did after, because it's applicable to a lot of guys. But before we do, what if you could look back macro, what was like on a spectrum, the absolute best pinnacle of the military or combat or SEAL teams offset by the worst? What are those two for you?
The worst day of my military life was learning about Red Wings, for sure. Because back at that point, I was back in Little Creek. So unquestionably, that was the worst. The best day in the military was the whole thing. When people say, thank you for your service, my response is always, I should have paid the government. I didn't do it to like have this notion to serve. No, this is my identity. Like, I was born to be in the profession of arms. And frankly, not being in the profession of arms, you're always a little bit lost. For me, thousands and thousands and thousands of people who go on and recraft their identity, but I don't know that I am capable.
So I think that we're both talking to you exclusively for what you said. We were both lost, finding that tribe, finding that group, that camaraderie, that brotherhood, whatever you want to call it, the purpose higher than yourself is literally the reason that we started our company and we're doing this, because we, lost little puppies in the world. So neither one of us retired. We went out and got MBAs. You retired. What was it like retiring and being lost and starting again?
I think that there's a large discrepancy between the time that people think it takes to reacclimate into civilian society. People throw around these handles like, oh, it's going to take, you need to start preparing for transition 2 years out. You need to, do this, that, or the other thing. It's going to take you 2 years to sort of acclimate. I'm out, but 12 years, I'm still not fully reacclimated. There's parts of the community that I miss now, and I'm never going to not miss. And I'm never going to get it back, right? And the other thing is that the propagation, and this is a bit of a rant, but I'm going to go anyway. The propagation of what I call broken veteran syndrome is damaging veterans at scale. And the people doing this, veteran opportunities at scale, and the people doing this, although well-meaning in many, but not all, of these veteran service organizations, aka 501s, by propagating a myth that veterans are damaged goods and they need your help in order to drive donations and stuff like that, has been poured into marketing campaigns. Being a media guy, right? We're over the past 20 years, and I won't name the organizations, but now you've got the 97% of the rest of the population thinks that veterans are damaged goods. Well, the facts don't support that. After World War II, hundreds of thousands of veterans returned to the United States and created the entrepreneurial class that has been the leading driver of growth and job initiatives and GDP in the United States. That's a fact. Veterans are not damaged goods. They're not all PTSD afflicted. They're not going to spike your healthcare component plan at your local company, which is what all these HR people think. They say, oh yeah, we want to hire 10,000 veterans. Go back into the HR department, because we run a recruiting company as well. Go back into the HR department, and the 25-year-old that's actually looking at resumes, they're scared of you. Because since they were a baby, all they heard is this other stuff. So I've got a big issue with where we are nowadays and the society's belief on what veterans bring to the table. How could you not want to work with people who have a serving heart, who put other people ahead of their own self-interests to serve the country the cause, whatever the case may be, like they should be your most highly employable assets.
In our company, we're heavily veteran. We're somewhere about 75% veteran, and we view it as a strategic advantage. And I think that the difference between veterans is like, I try to explain it as silly as it is. Imagine that you go outside and you start painting your fence, and your neighbor comes by and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" "Hey, I'm painting my fence." Most neighbors will be like, "Yeah, good." And they go back inside. A veteran, for as dumb as it is, they'll volunteer their time and they'll turn I into we really quickly. It's like, "Hey, let me grab some beers. We'll paint this fence together." For no other reason, they can't help themselves. They overly volunteer. And it's just refreshing to be around that. They're not broken, they're helpful.
I want to hit your point from another angle, Sam. Like from what I've seen from the veterans, like the quote unquote trauma, it's not like when they get back to the civilian world, they're harmed by what they experience in combat. I almost think it's the inverse. They're almost more calmed by the absence of what they had in combat, by the absence of the tribe and the ultra engagement and the mission worth dying for. And that's why, like Rob was talking about Zero Eyes, we tried to replicate that. And when it comes down to hiring veterans, that's what they can bring, is trying to recreate that environment. So instead of it being this basket case, they're actually coming with something incredibly valuable to any organization because they're trying to recreate that ultra intense aliveness. I don't know how else to describe it. They want to be on and completely engaged and completely committed. That's an asset if you know how to use it. I think that's probably an education piece.
Yeah, I believe it's an education piece with regards to employers, meaning people that are involved with the hiring decision. I think that from the veterans' perspective, one of the most difficult aspects of reintegration into civilian society is achieving alignment when your personal ethos and operating system does not comport to how that system works, meaning out in the real world. And I'll give a very simple example for what was admittedly complicated. In the military, you generally trust people to do what they say they're going to do, almost 100% of the time. And you quickly know in that culture when somebody is not capable of doing what they say they're going to do, and they very quickly become marginalized and not part of the conversation. As a culture, that's what we do in the military. Out in the civilian world, the system of incentives is completely different. It doesn't matter that much whether you fall in on what you agreed to do, and you can be punished professionally for not making the right political choices independent of whatever the effect is on the organization or your team. The simplest way for me to put it is it's as if you are trying to fly a helicopter and you've been doing it for 10 years or 6 years or 20 years in the military, and then you were taken out of the military, put in a completely different place. They took all the avionics out of your helicopter. You've got blind spots and you're asked to go fly a very complicated mission up in the mountains without any of the intuition, pattern recognition, or teammates around you to help you be successful. So it's not just the absence of community, it's the absence of an operating system to fit into. And I tell this to any veteran who listen, brother, sister, trust me when I say this. You cannot trust what people are telling you. You can eventually trust people once you've worked with them and they've proven the fact that they're trustable. But in the military, it's almost a trust first basis. And out in the real world, trust eventually. Because out here, it's chess on the trust board. And over there, it's checkers on the trust board. And until you figure out most people are in it for themselves and not in it for the team, you're lost the whole way. In business, reintegrating into society, whatever it is, like your radar screen's off. And it just depends on how many years it's going to take you to learn lessons the hard way. Because experience is the roughest kind of teacher. She gives you the test first and the lesson afterwards.
What have you learned were the best way for people to find meaning, find purpose, and thrive? What were the things that you did that helped yourself? What's the best way to do this?
I'll give you kind of the 1, 2, or 3 most important things for any transitioning veteran to know and just take it. What matters more in the civilian world with regards to access to opportunities is relationships. It is not your skill level. It is not, quote unquote, what you bring to the table per se. Now, you do have to be competent at what you're doing. Once you've been in the system long enough, you realize that relationships and politics are just as much, if not more important than whatever skills you bring to the table. If you have your heart set on being in a particular industry or doing a particular job, step number one is building your targeting list for relationships that matter, that can help you. Because people do want to help. They cannot help you when you show up to a shooting or fishing event and there's a bunch of rich guys in there and you don't know what you want. If you show up to that game saying, well, I've been thinking about this and I've been thinking about zoology and I might want to be a veterinarian, but I could also, really super interested in like running a restaurant. There's no place to help you. So the relationships will get you the opportunities, but you have to invest, and you've got to basically, you can't just be introverted and not think that it matters, because it's everything. You got to network your way into your next opportunity. One. Number two, there's $1 trillion industry making people feel shitty about their decisions in life. Everybody wants to sell you an online course. They find your purpose, all this other kind of bullshit. Find a fucking job. Start there. Show up somewhere. Do great work. In the space of 18 months, you'll be running the place. Why? Because you're more competent than 90% of the people in there. Number two, you know how to organize people and stuff. You know how to get shit done. And you are probably going to do what you say you can do. Those four things are going to set you head and shoulders above the vast majority of people that are in there, because you've got the soft skills and you've got the cycles of hard decision making. You've been through those cycles 10x more than most of the people that you're encountering in the civilian world. Be confident, right? Have a sense of a direction you want to do. Go in, network your way to get an opportunity in those places. If you don't like it, you're not signed up. There's no enlist. You can stop what you're doing, go pick something completely different. And it doesn't matter whether people think you're distracted. You'll eventually find happiness or find your purpose or find your mission when you're good at what you do and you're earning reasonable enough money and so on and so forth. But don't sit there and drink yourself to death, get out of shape. As the cycle usually goes, people get out, well, I'm going to take a gap year, sort of. I'm going to kind of fish around for a thing. I'm sort of self-directed, but I'm not exactly sure what I want to do. They're going to drink more. They're going to wind up eating more. They're not going to have as much physical activity. They're going to get out of shape. They're not going to look the part anymore. People make hiring decisions based on physical attributes. So the first thing would be, the minute you get out, if you're not in and around a military center where you can go to the gym with other friends and stuff like that, then join the gym, get into classes, and show up. Stay in shape. This is a really important time, the transition. Drink less. There's a lot of things competing for your time, energy, and attention, and you don't want bad habits to take you down a path that you can't recover from as you get older and older.
Let's pivot to SOFX and talk about that for a few minutes, and then we'll do some closing questions.
Sure. So SOFX, it's been in a continuous daily publication, the SOFX report, for 10 years. And nowadays, SOFX is a media company. And so the newsletter product is one aspect of what we do. But how it all originally started was a belief that I had in 2014 and still have now, that the large tech platforms and mainstream media was hurtling towards an environment of deep distrust, that technology would increasingly encroach on our privacy. The democracy that we knew of is under attack, and that the vast majority of humans would eventually come to the conclusion that they can't trust the Microsoft, LinkedIn, Gmail, Facebook. These are bad actors. And that I believe that people would eventually revert to what I call hyper-artisanal communities that were denominated by sort of rule number one of special operations, which is humans are more important than hardware. So what am I building at SOFX? It's really like a breakaway tribe. It will eventually have membership features. It will eventually, for the same reason you wouldn't hire a cook to like build yourself a deck on your house. Like, wouldn't you rather learn about war and war reporting from actual operators than journalists? Like the era of somebody sitting in the Diplomat Hotel in Kabul reporting on a war that's happening 30 miles up in the mountains. Like, wait, what? Like, there's all this great content being captured on helmet cams and first-person reporting. The reporters have got an AK-47 in one hand and a helmet camera or iPhone in the other. What I was doing with building SOFX is building basically a private news network for people I care about and whoever else wanted access to a de-enshittified, apolitical, short-form reporting that then has longer explanations, if you go to the website and stuff, but it has been intentionally curated so that it's high trust. We're looking at things that mainstream media won't touch because they're not going to sit there and report on people that are reporting something happening on Telegram channels, like in real time, like we do.
I've been subscribed for maybe 6 or 7 years. I don't know. The thing that I get from it, and to hear it from me, I feel connection when I get it.
The other sort of job that the SOFX report had to do was, and you guys probably recall this from your time in uniform, a lot of times we would just bitch when we had to train foreign forces, like host nation training. I'd rather be out operating and stuff. But in the big scheme of things, we wanted to train host nations to be able to fight their own battles. But what I saw from my perspective was that the guys that are doing the training at year whatever don't actually ever get to see the outcome of what that training did. Part of the lift that we do is to show operators, hey, remember 5 years ago you were training the Iraqi police to be able to do these things? Like, lo and behold, they're taking down ISIS cells now. 5 years, like that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for your training events. So part of it was showing the community the deep value longitudinally of what they were doing. And then the second major lift originally that the SOFX report had to do was to demonstrate to the community how the world is reporting about them. Like prior to SOFX, there are other special operations informed media companies out there, but many of them would report on the community. Team room chat about this, or we heard a rumor about that, but that's not what we do. What we do is scan the world for all the news and reporting that's fit to print with regards to either special operations, clandestine services, paramilitary or private military contractor operations, anything having to do with global conflict, so that the community could know how the world was talking about them. Because the great disservice that Hollywood does with regards to special operations in particular is it's constantly telling just one side of the diamond. Now, people who have served in the special operations community really understand the entire breadth of what we do, which is much more dynamic and interesting than just the direct action stuff that people are familiar with.
Let's wrap it up with a few quick questions. So the first one is, how do you kick off your day? Do you have a certain routine that allows you to be as optimal as humanly possible?
So I do day planning. That's tied back to annual planning that I do. Again, I had to, back to that discussion about an operating system, I had to invent sort of an operating system to keep myself pointed in the right direction. So daily journaling and planning is key and essential. Establishing patterns of life is key and essential. So I'd bring my son to school and then immediately go to the gym. Non-negotiable. Cannot show up anywhere else unless I've gone to the gym for an hour or so and push myself. I do 2 things: strength training 4 to 5 days a week. And then 2 days a week, I'll do high intensity interval training. And then I also do cold plunges, saunas, and sort of wellness stuff, which is a game changer for inflammation and a game changer for flexibility and for wellness.
Love it. For the journal, so for those who can't see it, probably 20 or 30, it looks like 20 or 30 full journals on that table. What does a journal look like? What's a typical entry?
It's just planning the day. And so what I do is I actually have got a checklist. I've got 5 checklists to help me run my life. One is the weekly planning checklist. And then I've got a day start and a day close checklist. And basically the checklists take me through the process of planning the day, which begins with praying. Then we do 3 things I'm grateful for. Have to write down 3 things I'm grateful for every day. So I've got these sort of 8 questions that start the day that put me in the right mental framework for the day. And then I go down and handwrite every different engagement I've got across the schedule. I have what's called a 3+6 methodology. It's all born of books I've read or whatever, but 3 major objectives for the day. One, which is the one thing objective, the most important that I have to work on or get done. The second are sort of negotiable if I can get to them. And then 6, what are called NCTs or non-critical tasks. Things that I have to do, but it's not that important. So the one thing is the thing that is the most important that has to get done before I dig into the non-critical tasks, which could be anything from, hey, call the painters to organize that, or go pick up my son from school, or whatever it is. If you let your to-do lists of non-critical things get too big, you're always going to be working on shit that doesn't move the needle. So you've got to pick an important thing that you've been avoiding or probably procrastinating against. And you have to write that. If there's the science behind it is like unequivocal. You write stuff down, you have a 40 to 60% higher probability of it actually getting done. At the end of the day, my daily wrap up, I've got to basically mark each task in there with either red, I didn't get to work on it at all, orange, we got to work on it, or green, I'm finished, did it. When I just thumb through the journals, like I can look at the colors and I can know like how well we're doing this month, this week, this year, whatever it is.
That is gold. Last question. You talked before about books that kind of influence your life. If you had to pick one or two or three books that changed your life the most, that maybe other people should read, what would they be?
My philosophy on a lot of different things have been shaped by a handful of different books, and they sort of blend together. Let's say, for instance, many of your podcast listeners are entrepreneurs or potentially veterans who are thinking about starting a business. The most important book for them to read if you're trying to build an early stage business, there's a couple I'll give you. One of them is Gino Wickman's book called Traction, and it talks about an entrepreneurial operating system that you have to install in order to make your company scalable. If you're just trying to figure out how to be more productive and stuff like that, Getting Things Done by David Allen's really good.
That's all I got. Sam, what do you got for us? Anything you want to add?
I appreciate the time I spent with you guys. I think that the Zero Eyes mission of AI-enabled detection technologies to avert the suffering that we encounter with school shootings is absolutely one of the most important national objectives that we should have. If we can't protect our children from the monsters, like what are we doing? Absolutely believe that what you guys are working on is critical for us. So thank you on behalf of numerous parents who don't even know that the technology that you brought to the table saved their child's life.
Thank you. How can people follow you, find SOFX?
Cool. Yeah, the best way to do it is just go to www.sofx.com. Sign up for the SOFX report. It's free, and we do not rent, sell, or share the member list with anybody. And you can expect in the future private communities, events, humans interacting with one another, just a high trust, very important network that I think can serve a lot of people. So you just go there and you can find me. I'm super easy to find on any of the social things. It's usually at sam.havelock or at Sam.
Sam, genuinely appreciate you having you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it, and I can't wait to see you again.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/Nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.